up the tree, and we were able to back up and yank this thing up. We got the worst, creepiest feeling that tree had been pushed over on purpose by something, and we didn't think it was a bear. We didn't see or hear anything other than that, but it was just freaky. And we got that tree we moved so fast. Like, we barely even had that tree out of the way. I jumped back in the truck, and we hauled tail out of the mountains. So now
that's interesting. You know, how many people are freaked out by these creatures, Jeff?
Well, yes. I mean, it is a commonly reported experience, and you know, we can only speculate on the basis of that kind of a reaction, whether it's just the unexpected, the fear of the unknown, or whether there's something more visceral taking place as a result of some sort of interaction. But I've often spoken with seasoned, hardened outdoorsmen and hunters who, after such an experience, will swear they'll never go back to that spot again, and they don't go out in the woods unarmed any longer. And so you have to wonder what precipitated such a visceral reaction to that kind of an experience.
Let's go to Jerry, truck driving in Texas. Hey, Jerry, you're on the show. Go ahead.
George, good to talk to you guys tonight. I was going to need to ask your guest there what he thinks about that documentary that was probably made back in the 60s about that tracker that had caught a clip of Bigfoot walking down through a creek bed there before he got out of range. I'm sure he's familiar with familiar with the film clip, but I'd like to know what he thinks about that. And there was an experience I had. I was elk hunting up in Montana, kind of southwest of Kalispell out there, and I was sitting in a tree up there and really didn't see anything. I got down and it was dark, and I want to tell you what, George, I felt something looking at me. My adrenaline kicked in, my asthma kicked off. I didn't know if I was going to make it back to the truck. I couldn't get back to that truck quick enough. It scared. I'm a good-sized fella, and it scared me almost to death.
Jeez. What is it about these creatures, Jeff, that make people so freaked out?
Well, like I said, we can only speculate. In my book, in the chapter on vocalization, I broach an interesting possibility, and that is that they may be capable of generating infrasound of a high enough intensity that it has a visceral effect on witnesses. There's some all sorts of interesting literature that talks about the effects of acoustics on the function of organs and the reaction by receptor sites within the brain that can affect mood and psyche and even states of consciousness. So the litany of animal species that have been now documented capable of producing such infrasound in various and utilizing it in various capacities has really grown tremendously. And while there has not been definitive studies conducted on great apes, they certainly have the plumbing in the form of extralaryngeal air sacs that would allow them to potentially generate and project that kind of a infrasonic blast. By infrasonic, it wouldn't be perceived audibly, but yet the effects of that vocalization might be perceived in the form of fear or elation or nausea or disorientation, and those are all responses that various witnesses that I've interviewed to have at one time or another have made mention of. So, the gentleman asked about a film back in the 60s. I mean, other than the...
Sounds like the Patterson film.
Well, right. I mean, as far as I know, that's the only clip from the 60s. And so if it is the Patterson-Gimlin film, I'm quite convinced that that's the genuine article. We've examined and re-examined from so many different angles and so many different perspectives. And based on the anatomy, based on the nature of the gait, based on the correlated and well-documented footprints, and the action of the feet that can be seen in the film itself, I'm quite convinced that that's the best photographic evidence, and stands as the most compelling piece of visual evidence that these creatures exist.
Do you think the Yeti sightings in the Himalayas and the Sasquatch sightings in North America are the same species?
I don't, because the descriptions of their appearance and their behavior are rather distinct. Although, and the footprints that have been attributed, the very few of the many reported footprints that provide enough detail to allow us to assess them, suggest a foot that has a divergent big toe, much more like a gorilla or a chimpanzee. Probably the best tracks that have been attributed to the Yeti were documented by the McNeely-Cronin expedition to the Iran Valley in Nepal, and very well documented, very fresh tracks, and they essentially look like a large chimpanzee. But there have been other tracks that have been found in some of the lower elevations that are remarkably similar to Sasquatch tracks, however. One that I'm fairly confident about, its credibility, was brought back by Josh Gates, the host of Destination Truth. And so, some may say, well, that wasn't anything like a scientific expedition or qualified observers. But I based on the footprint itself, I can bring out of the drawers in my lab examples of tracks from the Intermountain West and the that are almost indistinguishable from the track that he brought back. So that suggests that maybe there are two species within the larger Nepal region, that whatever the Sasquatch of North America is, it has its correlate in Asia in the form of the Chinese Yeren, or the Mandiburung in India, or the a Sasquatch-like Yeti form, whatever you want to call it, the Tsute. And I know that there are some who say that Tsute is nothing but a brown bear, and that may well be, but a larger, more Sasquatch equivalent form. And when you go right along the foothills of the Himalayas up around to the Pamir and the Tian Shan and Altai Mountains in Georgia and Mongolia and over into the Caucasus, there continue to be well-documented instances of footprints that are virtually indistinguishable from those attributed to the Sasquatch in North America. So we suspect that Asia was the source for a North American primate. So it makes sense that species probably had a fairly widely distributed range throughout the mountainous forests of Eastern Asia, Central and Eastern Asia, and may still linger as relic populations in some of those now isolated areas throughout that region.
All right, let's go to Vicki in Villa, Washington. Hey, Vicki, thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Good evening. I have a story that I want to tell. My in-laws live in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, and one day we were up visiting them, and they live out in the country, and they have like 160 acres, and then they border national forest land, so there's a lot of property up there. And one night we were sitting around in the house, and we could hear these coyotes fighting with something, and you could hear about 6 coyotes fighting with this creature, and this creature had the voice like when you guys did the intro of that sound that you thought was a Yeti or Bigfoot, and they were fighting with him, and they were losing. My father-in-law, who is a mountain man, he lived in northern Idaho his whole life, was really freaked out about it and went and got the gun, and he wouldn't let anybody go out of the house. And we all knew that what they were fighting with was not a cougar, and it wasn't a bear, because none of us had ever heard that sound. Well, where my in-laws live, I said Borders Forest Service, they also have found like little caves, or my mother-in-law would go for a walk, and she goes, she would smell really funny stuff. And one time she found like a a little small cave where there was grass and hair that she hadn't seen before. And so she would tell us about it, and they had built a pond where some water was, and they have footprints, and they have pictures of the footprints. And so I do believe that maybe there's one living up there. And I just thought I'd tell you guys that.
Yeah,
And
no,
my cousin is from Walla Walla, who used to go up into the Blue Mountains and look for Bigfoot. So you probably know who my cousin would be if I mentioned his name.
What's his first name, Vicki?
His first name is Wes.
Wes.
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely.
There you go. Well,
Yeah.
What is it about the state of Washington where there seem to be so many sightings, Jeffrey?
Well, I think that the core habitat for these creatures that was originally, or has been, continues to be the temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest. And by far the greatest extent there from the Olympic Peninsula and throughout the North Cascades and on down, all the way through the Cascades of Oregon and into Northern California. That's the one of the core habitats, which probably supports some of the greatest densities and therefore has the most frequent encounters. Here in the Intermountain West, the reports do tend to be a little less frequent, and part of that is just the behavior of the local human population. Idahoans have historically been rather tight-lipped about this subject and not been willing to share their experiences to the degree that other geographical areas, populations in other geographical areas. So, for example, the suggestion that you have photographs from the Bonners Ferry area would be very interesting to me because we have very little in the way of footprint evidence from the state of Idaho. I'd love to take a look at those if you can get in touch with me.
All right, get them to Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, and I'll be back in a moment as we talk next with Daniel Perez.